That's a strange little old three-word phrase that seems to bob up a lot lately. Where it's at. I began to hear this on TV ads, I guess, and somehow it caught my ear. The latest example was about a cruise ship, Holland America, trying to entice me and you up to Alaska on one of their beautiful tours. Their punchline was, beautiful Alaska, where it's at. And I thought, wait a minute, I bet a bunch of those people who go up to Alaska have a nice trip and come back a whole lot smarter than they were. But none of them ever thought about what it was or where it really was at. So it put me to thinking, this phrase seems to have some kind of a drawing power, must work in the advertising world, because maybe subconsciously we all feel that there is something out there which is of inestimable value and worth finding. And we have that gut feeling that there is something out there, but we don't know where it is at. But we somehow or other respond to this thing every time it happens. Well, after I'd been thinking about this a little bit, this funny little phrase, I got to wondering exactly maybe what it could mean. And one night there, in about a twinkling of an eye, I think I happened upon two really nice little ideas that have a lot of validity. I not only know what it is, but I know where it is at. Now hear me very clearly here. I know what it is, and I know where it is at. And you're all going to be a little surprised, I think. But I hope you'll be pleased. Let me give you the definition of it. It is an inward urge toward goodness. Let me repeat that. It is an inward urge toward goodness, which is in the hearts of all of us. There you have it, both questions, what it is and where it is at. It's in the heart of individuals. Over a period of years, one remembers certain stories which come back and prove helpful as analogies. I want to give you 3 or 4 little stories which indicate to me that there is indeed something wonderful out there and indicate what it is. Now, the first story goes back to Mr. Victor Bradley, who told us one day about taking a trip out in Virginia when his little son Victor was about 8 years old, and Victor was my age. They were traveling out to the coast to get on a United Fruit Company boat, take a trip down the coast. And they were about halfway across Virginia, and they stopped in a little town, spent the night, and went in the hotel, and little Vic began to complain about his toe hurting. So his dad slipped off his shoe and sock, and he had a bad-looking toe that was already infected then. And he put his shoe back on and went down to the lobby and asked to go tell people where he could find a doctor. Well, there was one right there in the same block. So they walked down to this doctor's office, and he looked at Victor's foot, and did what he needed to do, put a dressing on it, and said, "Now, Mr. Bradley, about this time tomorrow, you bring him back and I'll put another dressing on it, and that ought to do it." And Mr. Vick said, "Now, I've got a bad schedule to keep here, and I hadn't planned to do it that way." And he said, "Now, I've got to get out to the coast by tomorrow night." Well, the doc says, "What time had you intended to go in the morning?" He said, "About 6 o'clock. He said, "I'll meet you right here in my office at 6 o'clock. So at 6 o'clock next morning, there they were. And the old doc cleaned the place and dressed it again and felt that Vic would be okay. Mr. Bradley said, "Now, doctor, how much do I owe you?" And he said, 80 cents. Well, it was a kind of a hush, and Mr. Victor said, "You know you can't run a practice with fees like that." And the doctor said, "Mr. Bradley, do you know anything about the Bible?" Mr. Victor said, Yeah. He said, "There's a place in there where it says, 'Be kind to the visitor within your gates.'" Mr. Bradley, you are the stranger within my gates. Well, that really was a wonderful lesson to Mr. Bradley and to little Vic. And it points out that urge toward goodness, which is in the heart of people. Now, that word goodness can be broadly interpreted. It's urge toward decency, the urge toward integrity, the urge toward helping those who are in need of help. There are many ways of looking at this word goodness within this phrase when we talk about the urge toward goodness that is in all of us. A number of years ago, young Bob Mills, when he was in school, set out to rebuild an old automobile and bring it up to first-class condition. He learned that he might rent space for that job from an older fellow who lived out on Avondale Street, a mechanic, an automobile mechanic who was just top-notch in his field, Stanley Elliott. They had vastly different backgrounds, but they turned out to be a good team. They made an arrangement. Young Bob took his whole car out there and began to take it apart piece by piece and to clean it and repaint it, put it back together again. At one stage, they had the body suspended above the running gear and chassis, and young Bob had cleaned that thing just meticulously, all over. Then he set out to paint the chassis, that long steel rail which ties the car together, of course. When he finished painting that chassis, he's standing there with his brush and can in his hand, and set it down on a bench to kind of relax a moment, and Stanley happened to have walked in. And young Bob said, "Well, I got that job done, all except painting the inside of that frame. And I guess nobody will ever know that. There was a pause, and Stanley looked at him evenly and said, "We'll know it." What a tremendous statement for just plain integrity. You have this young student with these ideas and these dreams, and he's moving along in life. And you have this older man who all his life had made it a point to be an excellent craftsman. So there came this crunch moment, and the old craftsman said, "But we'll know it." And young Bob turned around and picked up his paintbrush, painted the inside of that chassis. Sometime you might even get caught in the crossfire of one of these urges. You no doubt have been the object of it many times, but unaware of it. Let me tell you what happened to me in the summer of 1995. I was in St. Joseph's Hospital for spine surgery. And on this particular morning, early in the morning, I was on a gurney in the hall outside the X-ray lab. There were several people waiting for X-rays. The door would open and they would come out and bring in one more gurney and do the X-rays. I'd been there just minutes, I guess, lying on my back in the quiet of the hall down there. It wasn't a very busy place. I was lying there with my eyes shut, and I'm so glad I kept them shut. You'll understand why later. But I hear footsteps approaching along this line of gurneys. It was an unmistakable click of a girl's heels on the floor there. As she came clicking along that row of gurneys and stopped just exactly opposite me. Now, in a minute, a much younger hand than mine and a much warmer hand than mine had picked up my hand and was holding it. With the other hand, she was running her fingers through my hair. I guess this must have lasted for 30 seconds. And I'm so glad I didn't open my eyes. Presently, she withdrew her hand from my hair, put my hand back down on the gurney, and went clicking away into the future. I'll never know what brought that about. But I've just got to believe in my heart that there was an inner urge in the heart of this young lady, maybe to say a prayer for somebody she didn't even know. Do you see how wonderful this can be? Do you see the implications of it? And the sad thing, it happens millions of times every day, and we seem to be unaware of it. So it is this inward urge toward goodness, and it is in every one of us. And in one way or another, it will manifest. And when it does, it's pretty wonderful. Now, this is not limited to any group of people or any particular nation. Several years ago, a group of American women were visiting Japan, and they were in a little village, and they admired a particular flower garden, which, though it was very small, had some of the most beautiful flowers they'd ever seen. They just made a big deal over this. They got so excited about it. And this was just a little housewife whose love was for flowers. They went back to the adjoining little town that night, and maybe 7, 8 miles away. And early next morning, when one of them got out to get a breath of fresh air, she stepped out on a little porch there, and there was a beautiful vase of those same flowers that they'd seen the day before. Turns out that the little lady whose flowers belonged to had gotten up in the early dawn and walked several miles across the country and put those flowers on the porch of her friends, and then went back to her little village. That inward urge toward goodness had once more been expressed. This inward urge toward goodness often is expressed in the lives of people who carry on when they don't always feel like carrying on. There's something inside that makes them go on. They want to do their duty, and in their own individual way, they pursue it. And many times it isn't easy at all. Now, I might embarrass Lena here, but I want to use her for an example here. Lena has a pretty hard time walking around. This arthritis gives her terrible trouble. And she still insists on preparing our meals and doing a lot of things at home that I think she could get help doing, but she won't listen. But she goes on without complaining. And I know that every step she takes, most of the time, hurts her. Well, how are you going to beat an attitude like that? Here again is this inner urge toward goodness, toward doing the right thing, and it causes them to do it. You run into these individuals in funny places. I guess I've kind of collected stories like that and didn't know what I was going to do with them until tonight. But one night in my recent stay at the hospital, I ran into a nurse who lives down at Nancy, Kentucky, down below Somerset. Her home is down there, but she works in Georgetown and stays here with a sister during the week. But she was telling me what a wonderful thing it was for her to go back home to Nancy. And here's what she said, in essence. She says, about once a month, I go back home and open up my house and invite all of my neighbors in to the biggest meal I could get together for them. And we have a good time and visit with each other and swap stories. And she says most of those are the people in my little church. And when I'm there, I go and help in the church. Then she laughed and said, I'm a terrific clown. And then sometimes I can be a bag lady. And then she says, sometimes I can even give a little devotional. But then she had what I thought was a wonderful thought. She said, you know, when we're all together like that in our little church, we love each other. There's a lot of love in that little church. And I've just got to go back there about once a month. Well, now here you have a person with an ordinary job, working ordinary hours, but putting that little beautiful touch into life that it is her own peculiar talent to put in. That little inward urge toward goodness is just this is another case of where it manifests itself. Maybe you hadn't picked up on it yet, but the actions of these people, whatever they might be, add to the quality of life which we know about today. Think about it. Millions of people, many, many hundreds of thousands, who do little things like this every day. They add to the collective warmth and beauty in our society as we know it. And maybe it's a heartening thought that all of the nincompoops inside the Beltway and all of the greedy fellows on Wall Street and all those purveyors of baseness in Hollywood, regardless of how hard they work at their little tasks, there are not enough of them, nor can they ever organize. They'll never overcome the wonderful collective goodness that's done by these kind of folks. And somehow or other, I want to leave you with this thought, and I'll tell you a final little story. But somehow or other, my life has been enriched immensely, particularly in my later years, because I think I was becoming aware of some of this that was happening around me. And it only took this crazy little ad to focus my attention. I wish you would get in the habit of talking to the little people around you. Ask them what their hobbies are, what they do, and where they go. And invariably, you'll uncover a real little gem. You'll find another place where it's at. And if you do that, your life will be enriched many, many times. Now let me tell you one more little story. It indicates the inner urge on the part of all of us to do a job well. A number of years ago, I went out to Denver with Kiwanis as chairman of the On the Convention Committee. Part of my job was to furnish a program for the ladies' night and see that it would be a worthwhile effort. We had about 295 people at that dinner that night. But I wanted to have music in it, and I wanted to have a good speaker. Now there's a fellow named Tom Bonney who lived down at Irvine, Kentucky. And Tom led the singing at Kiwanis. He had a wonderful baritone voice, and when he smiled, everybody got into the singing with him. And I persuaded Tom to go out to Denver to lead the music at that evening meal. Got Louis Throgmorton to come up from Dallas. So we had a good cast of characters there. I wanted to do one special thing, though. I wanted Tom to lead us in singing Battle Hymn of the Republic, because whenever he did that, he took people right up out of their chairs. I'd heard him do it on numerous occasions. And of course I told him I want him to sing that song. And also it occurred to me that we had a flag on the stage with a fan blowing on it, that when Tom got underway and the light went on and the fan went on, that would just be about some kind of a peak or other for the evening. Well, just minutes before time for the dinner, I was down checking place cards and things at the front table like that, and a little boy came up to me and said, "Are you Mr. Moss?" I said, "Yes." He said, "I don't want you to worry about that flag and that light." And he said it with such a degree of pride I couldn't help smiling at him. He said, "I've been practicing with that thing all afternoon, and it's going to work. Don't you worry about it." And I said, "Yes, I believe you. I really believe you." Well, we had a wonderful meeting that night. And as it kind of drew to a close, and Tom was leading everybody out to the tops of their lungs, and the flag was flying, and the light was on the flag. It was just a thrilling moment. And I happened to look at this little fella. He was lying sort of on his back under one of the front tables with his head against the table leg. He had his hand on the switch on the fan and on the switch on the light, and you should have seen the look on that little fella's face. Here was another one of those wonderful examples of the urge toward doing things the right way. Thank you for listening to me. I just wanted to get this out because I hope you'll begin to look for those people around you who have those wonderful inner urges and sometimes are able to do something about that. Thank you.